Can you answer some questions about Calvinism? The query was directed to me by a young man who was among a number of us sitting together around a restaurant table one evening recently in a city where I was speaking at a conference. "Why do you ask me?" was my somewhat puzzled response. "We heard you were writing a book about Calvinism." "Yes, I am. A book. In fact, that I didn't want to write. There are fine Christians on both sides. The last thing I want to do is create more controversy. But it's a topic that really has to be faced and dealt with thoroughly." Glancing around the table, I was surprised at the interest reflected on each face, which this turn in the conversation had suddenly aroused. Everyone was listening intently. I had scarcely given Calvinism a thought for years. Then suddenly, or so it seemed to me, in the last 2 years, Calvinism began emerging as an issue everywhere. Perhaps I'm just waking up, but it seems to me that this peculiar doctrine is being promoted far more widely and aggressively now than I was ever aware of in the past. The knowing expressions and nodding heads confirmed my impression. "They tell me," I added, "that R.C. Sproul is continually pushing it on the radio across the country." "Our church recently added a new associate pastor to the staff," explained the young man who had raised the question. "He introduces Calvinism in almost every session in the Bible class he teaches." "Let me suggest how he might do it," I responded. "He asked the class what they think comes first, faith or regeneration. Everyone says faith, of course. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. Then he challenges them. But mankind is dead in trespasses and in sins. How can a dead man believe?" I had the young man's total attention. "That's it exactly. How did you know?" Then he explains. I continued, "That God has to give life sovereignly to those who are spiritually dead before they can believe or even understand the gospel. That regeneration must precede faith." "You're right, but it seems bizarre, like having to get saved before you can get saved." "The Calvinists wouldn't put it in those precise words," I responded. "But it's even a bit stranger than that. Without understanding or believing anything about God or Christ or the Bible, because no one supposedly can until they're regenerated, the elect are made spiritually alive by a sovereign act of God, without any desire or cooperation on their part, and without even knowing what is happening to them at the time." "That's exactly what he's been teaching," added another member of the same church. "It doesn't make sense. I never read anything like that in the Bible." "Are you the only ones who have expressed any concern?" I asked. "Do those who thought faith came first immediately accept this new concept?" "Most do, but it has caused some confusion, and a few people have left the church." "No one challenges him?" I asked, "with the obvious fact that spiritual death can't be equated with physical death? That physical dead people not only can't believe, but they can't sin or do anything else." "That physically dead people not only can't believe, but they can't sin or do anything else. I guess none of us have that thought of that. What does the senior pastor say?" He doesn't seem to know how to handle the confusion being caused by his new assistant. We never heard anything like this from the pulpit before. But now hints of Calvinism are even sneaking into his sermons. The conversation went on like this for some time. Every new aspect of Calvinism I explained was greeted with further explanation of yes. That's exactly what we're hearing. Others at the table from entirely different areas of the country began to relate their experiences. One man had recently left a church which had split over the issue of Calvinism. The deacon board had voted that every member must sign a Calvinistic statement of faith. Someone else was from a church where the pastor and elders had taken a hard line against what they considered to be a divisive issue, and had disfellowshipped a Sunday school teacher for continuing to indoctrinate his junior high class into Calvinism in spite of several warnings not to do so. Someone else was from a church where the pastor and elders had taken a hard line against what they considered to be a divisive issue, and had disfellowshipped a Sunday school teacher for continuing to indoctrinate his junior high class into Calvinism in spite of several warnings not to do so. A couple had visited a highly recommended church in a large city near their home, pastored by a well-known Calvinist Arthur. We don't really know much about Calvinism, my dinner companions confessed, but it was a strange experience. On the one hand, we had the impression that these people felt they were a bit superior because they were the elect, but at the same time there seemed to be an undercurrent of insecurity. Performance seemed to be a major evidence of one's salvation, which added a rather legalistic flavor. As we got up to leave the table, a young woman who had sat through the entire discussion in silence asked if she could have a private moment of my time. We sat down again, and she began a tale of grief. She was a pastor's wife. Their lives in ministry had been happy and fruitful until their husband and two close friends, who were also pastors, became interested in a new truth. All three were very intellectual. As a result of reading current Calvinist authors, they had been drawn into the challenge of studying the writings of John Calvin, Jonathan Edwards, John Knox, and others. Their study had taken them all the way back to Augustine eventually became almost an obsession. Then each of them began to preach their new light from their pulpit. After being warned several times to desist from indoctrinating their congregations, they were removed from their pastorates by their denomination. Her husband began to worry whether he was really one of the elect. The nagging question grew into full-blown doubts about his salvation. The Calvinism, which had once seemed so satisfying, began to haunt him with uncertainty as to whether he was one of the elect.